I would like to welcome you to our presentation with the very long title, Effects of Homeopathic Preparations of Mercurius corrosivus on the growth rate of Mercury-Stressed Duckweed, Lemna, gibba L, as a function of different stress levels. This project we want to speak about today is academically associated at the University of Würtenberger in Germany and was supported by my former employer, that's the company Heferarzneimittel. It's a medium-sized manufacturer of homeopathic remedies and herbal medicines and vitamins in Germany, and was also supported by the Society for Cancer Research located in Arlesheim, Switzerland. That's the place where Stephan is working and where our friend and colleague, Dr. Tim Jäger, carried out these experiments for this study. First of all, we would like to honor Tim. Tim passed away on the 1st of March, unexpectedly for all of us, aged only 49. We're still quite shocked that we lost him. We were working together for this project for almost 6 years, from the first ideas we had until the finalization of the manuscript for our second publication. Our first publication was published in Homeopathy in May, and Tim finalized the draft for our second publication only a few days before we lost him, and I'm very, very grateful that he did that for us. Tim was the heart of this project. He was the genius experimenter who carried out the experiments. Together we planned all project steps, and we had a very fruitful discussions and inspiring discussions during the 6 years. And we supported him with our scientific knowledge and with project management. Tim was living for his work. For me, he was a very rare phenomenon. I would call him a postmodern alchemist. He had an extremely deep scientific education based on which he planned and did his experiment with an unbelievable accuracy and a big, big love for details. He had also acquired an excellent knowledge in statistics, and in addition, he was extremely literate about non-mainstream approaches, especially in water research, but also in the research of vital forces. And moreover, he had spent a lot of time working on the traditional body of knowledge in this field. For instance, the history of alchemy. That's one reason because we decided to choose a Paracelsus quote to honor him. And he was very inspired by the work of Rudolf Steiner. Tim, I know that you're here in this moment to support us, and I know how critical you can be, and I hope that all what we want to say now is in your sense. As long as I will live, you will always be a big inspiration for my future work. We will never forget you.
I kindly ask you to remain silent to honor Tim for about 20 seconds or so. Thank you. We now want to pass on with this talk. I give you a short overview about what we are going to tell you now on behalf of Tim. I will first give you a short background about his former work on the arsenic duckweed model that he developed during his PhD. We then had the aim of generalizing this bioassay to mercury. We will tell you shortly about the methods we had to adapt and to refine, and present you the results on the experiments with the Mercury-Stressed and Mercury-potentized treat duckweed for 2 different stress levels. And we end with an outlook how we would like to move on with this special bioassay. Now to start with, you may remember the duckweed study that Tim developed, that Tim carried out during his PhD, which was published in 2010. So Tim developed this model starting with duckweed that had been poisoned with arsenic. You see the effect of the of an arsenic poisoning here, so the duckweed just gets smaller. If you continue cultivating the duckweed, either unpoisoned, you see that's the normal development of the duckweed over from day 0, day 2 to day 6. But if you poison the duckweed with arsenic, you see that they are smaller, and also the growth rate is reduced in number and in size. And this was a kind of poisoning model, or an idea to treat to develop a model with diseased organisms in order to show or to investigate the effects of homeopathic remedies in this specific state. Now, what did he observe? In these experiments published 2010, he observed that a series of potency levels of Arsenicum album acted positively on the growth rate of these duckweed by increasing the growth rate by about 2%. I may add here that, as always in our labs, he carried out so-called systematic negative control experiments where we tested just water against water. So the same number of glass beakers where the duckweed grew have been treated in the same way, but all identical with water, but then analyzed according to the randomization that had been applied to the original real verum experiments. And you can see here there's no statistically significant difference, meaning that the experimental system is stable, and that these effects here with a very high probability are not due to any experimental artifact.
I want to say now a few words about the background and our research ideas and questions we had, especially for this study. First of all, before we started to define the detailed parameters for this experiment, we had the question, is it possible to generalize the detoxifying effects of potentized Arsenicum album on arsenic-poisoned duckweed to other heavy metal compounds? The aim behind was to use and to adapt the duckweed bioassay to other research questions in homeopathic research. And then we had one more idealistic aim in mind. Maybe some of you know that in 2013 the so-called Minamata Convention was published or was signed. The Minamata Convention was initiated by the United Nations Environment Programme, and the aim behind this paper is to regulate and to reduce the use of mercury substances worldwide, and there exists also a chapter about the use in medical products, and we would all agree in general it's sensible to reduce mercury in remedies, but in our case, our therapeutic traditions in homeopathy, but also in anthroposophic medicine, the use of potentized mercury substances is well established and a very old traditional use. And so one aim we had was to do something for mercury or for potentized mercury substances, even if we know that our system is no clinical trial and that the Lemnas are no human beings. And so in total, we came to our main research question for this study with Mercurius corrosivus or Mercury-Stressing. And this was, does potentized Mercurius corrosivus show detoxifying effects on mercury chloride-stressed duckweed? We chose mercury chloride due to its very good solubility. And then we had two further secondary questions: which potency levels are most effective, and is the effect size dependent on the stress level? At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that we were working on this project for almost 6 years, and so far as I remember, the first 1.5 or 2 years, we were busy to adapt the system to the new stressor, and there emerged a lot of problems and challenges, and here we mentioned only 3 of them. The first thing we saw was that the Lemna under Mercury-Stressing shows different phenomenological effects compared to arsenic stress. Here on the right side you see 6 beakers. From A to F the stressing increases. And you see the color disappears and also the growing is reduced. But what you can't see here is that the shape is a little bit different compared to the arsenic stress, and that was the first big task Tim had to learn, how the behavior of the lemnas under mercury stressing looks like. And the next thing was that we saw that the dose response curve is steeper for mercury chloride, and from this, the third point follows that the duckweed is more sensitive to minimal dosage changes. That means for this system, you need a very stable poisoning state, and that was quite complicated to find a way to stabilize the system. So, for instance, Tim started to weigh the biomass of the duckweed before poisoning. And yes, very exactly. On the next slide, I will show you some pictures of our experimental setup. On the first picture, you can see the outlook of our growth chamber. It was specifically constructed by Tim and optimized regarding homogeneity and especially light temperature and air currents. And here you see, you can look into the chamber. That's a full setup with 60 beakers, and the black squares are the randomization places. On the next slide you see two photos of the image analysis system. Here you see the camera system. Each beaker was photographed on each measuring day, and the pictures were analyzed with a specific image analysis software, especially written for duckweed bioassays. And here on the right side, you see an example picture of this image analysis. Then I want to say a few words about our methods. After the duckweed grew in Steinberg medium, the duckweed was stressed with mercury chloride for 48 hours, and we decided to carry out 3 experiments with a lower stress level with 2.5 milligrams per liter, and 3 experiments with 5 milligrams per liter. Then after poisoning, the plants were put into the beakers and grew in either of one of 7 different potency levels of Mercurius corrosivus from 24x to 30x, or in one of 7 control groups, either unsuccussed or succussed water. The growing duration was 7 days, and in total 56 beakers were included in the statistical analysis, and we had also in each experiment for open controls with unpoisoned duckweed, to control whether there are contaminations in the chamber. The growth rates were measured on the days 0, 3, and 7, and we compared the intervals between these days. In total, we carried out 6 independent experiments with Mercurius corrosivus, and also 6 independent water control experiments to investigate the stability of the experimental setups. And all our experiments were randomized and blinded. So now we come to our results.
So first of all, again, the systematic negative control experiments. You see in this setting with the severe stressed duckweed, which means that we had a 50% reduction in growth, that again, there were no significant differences. So again, the system is stable. So that's the good news, or the precondition for, I would say, the precondition of doing any experiments with homeopathic remedies. And then what Tim observed then in this trial was an unexpected result, because he observed a significant effect, but a reduction of growth rate applied after these potencies of Mercurius between the 24th and 30th decimal potency level. We for sure had not expected that kind of result, and then started to think what might have caused these paradoxical effects. And then Tim went further down into the phenomenology sorry, of the poisoning of the mercury-treated duckweed, and he had the impression that even though the reduction was about 50%, he had the impression that the duckweed were stressed too much, so that their self-regulating abilities were too low in order to react to the homeopathic remedy. Therefore, he decided to do another set of experiments with a less pronounced poisoning, leading to a reduction of only about 30% in growth. Again, first systematic negative control experiments are fine, the system is stable. And now, interestingly here, again statistically significant, now we observe the increase in growth after applying these ultramolecular potencies of Mercurius. So, and after having observed that, Tim developed a model or a hypothesis that biological organisms might show a differential reaction to a homeopathic treatment as a function of the stress level. So here on the x-axis is the degree of stress. So if you have a moderate stress, the organisms will be able to react to the homeopathic treatment in a positive way. If you increase the stress level further, you come to a 0 point, and if you induce too much stress, there will be a paradoxical or a negative effect of homeopathic remedies. For sure, that's a hypothesis, but I think this is a very interesting one, and it might also be a clue to the question why so many experiments in homeopathic basic research might be difficult to reproduce, especially if you are around here with poisoning, and if you do not really have a highly standardized system, you might get opposite results and finally end up with a chaos in your data. So I think this is a very important hypothesis to follow. So to come to the conclusions, we can state that the bioassay was stable, no false positive results in the systematic negative control experiments. We had a low biological variability, only about 1 to 2%. I think that's really excellent. We can state that potencies of Mercurius in this ultramolecular range were biologically active in these mercury-stressed duckweed. But the results were dependent on the stress level. So the growth was increased for moderate stress, but it was decreased for high stress. So summarizing, this duckweed bioassay showed effects of potentized arsenicum album after arsenic-induced stress. It showed effects of potentized Mercurius after mercury-induced stress. So the results could be generalized from arsenic to mercury. And this, I think you can follow me, leads to an idea that we could now investigate a similar principle in this model by inducing stress as well as by arsenic as well as mercury, and then treat both groups with either arsenic or Mercurius and cross it. And then you could compare the effects in both groups, and the hypothesis would be that the mercury-stressed duckweed would react to potentized mercury and the other way around, but not over the cross. So that's what we would like to do next, and we thank you for your attention.